Sorry, this is for all the TYT fans. 1 second before we do this story. Henry Kissinger's dead.
Henry Kissinger, America's most notorious war criminal, has died at the age of 100 in his home in Connecticut. Now, Kissinger is known for shaping pretty disastrous foreign policy in Vietnam, the Middle East, China. We could literally spend the entirety of the show today talking about Henry Kissinger's legacy. We're gonna focus on 2 issues: his role in carpet bombing Cambodia. We'll also talk about his role in orchestrating a coup in Chile, which did away with democratically elected Allende and replaced him with Pinochet in a military coup, a coup d'etat. But before we get to all of that, Cenk, very curious what you think right off the bat.
Yeah, so I think that one of the most interesting parts of this story is the difference between how the establishment treats Henry Kissinger and the rest of us. So he is despised by the world. He's despised by every normal American that knows anything about him. But the establishment, totally oblivious to it, are like, they hug and kiss Kissinger. They pay him $50,000 for showing up to any event.
It's insane.
And like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, all these people are like fawning over Kissinger. Oh, what a great job you did in killing millions of people in Cambodia and other places. Their lives didn't matter at all. Way to go, Henry. Way to destroy democracy in Latin America. You're so beloved. And it's more telling of the establishment than it is of Henry Kissinger. The fact that they love that guy is one of the worst marks against the powerful people in this country than you could imagine. I mean, that tells you they don't mind killing other people and destroying other democracies at all. In fact, they celebrate it.
They do.
So, and they're gonna go to his funeral and they're all gonna cry and weep and hug and all that stuff. And you're gonna see who those sick bastards are.
Well, for those of you who are not as familiar with Henry Kissinger, why don't we talk about his legacy and what he managed to do during his time in power. He served both in the Nixon administration and the Ford administrations. Kissinger served as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, positions that allowed him to direct the Vietnam War and the broader Cold War with the Soviet Union, and to implement a stridently realist approach that prioritized US interests and domestic political success over any potential atrocity that might occur. And he certainly had no problem with the United States committing atrocities in other countries, including countries we weren't even at war with. That includes Cambodia. Now, Kissinger served as Secretary of State between 1973 and 1977. I now want to talk about Cambodia and the Vietnam War. Now, in December of 1968, Nixon gets elected and he decides to appoint Kissinger as his national security advisor. And at this time, you got to keep in mind what the mood in the country was. At that point, the anti-war movement was already growing in the United States, and for good reason. So by 1968, the United States had been at war with Vietnam for 4 years. 500,000 troops were already in Vietnam, boots on the ground. More than 1 million Vietnamese died at this point after 4 years of that war. 31,000 Americans had been killed. Now, Kissinger became the head of the National Security Council in 1969 and decides to oversee the carpet bombing of Cambodia. And you're gonna understand why he decided to do this to a country that we were not at war with, a neutral country we were not at war with, in this next video. Take a look.
Kissinger asked the Pentagon to outline possible bombing strategies in Indochina, the former French colony that encompassed Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Soon it was decided that Cambodia was the best target for America's fleet of B-52 bombers. This is because it was host to large tracts of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which the Viet Cong used to move fighters and equipment into South Vietnam. The ensuing campaign dubbed Operation Menu, was conducted in total secrecy, for Kissinger knew that Congress would oppose the bombing of a neutral country. Kissinger was reportedly hands-on with the operation and was reportedly very excited by the strategy. According to a Pentagon report, Henry A. Kissinger approved each of the 3,875 Cambodia bombing raids in 1969 and 1970, as well as the methods for keeping them out of the newspapers.
The United States dropped 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia between 1969 and 1973. The bombing campaign ultimately killed between 150,000 and 500,000 Cambodian civilians. Various estimates suggest it also helped unleash a civil war inside Cambodia that led to the rise of the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, a dictator whose regime killed as many as 2 million Cambodians, according to modern appraisals. And by the way, I think it's important to note that Kissinger never showed a shred of remorse over the foreign policy that he implemented and tortured, killed, maimed all of these innocent people, again, in a country that we weren't even at war with, Cambodia.
So two really important things about this too. Sometimes the American planes wanted to lighten their load so that they can go on a longer bombing tour and still get back to base. But in order to do that, they had to save on fuel. So the US government, led by Henry Kissinger, told them, well, just drop the bomb on Cambodians, so that'll lighten your load. That wasn't even to bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That was just so they could do a deeper campaign inside Vietnam. So they would just drop bombs and kill the poor civilians underneath them for no reason.
Yep.
A giant percentage of the time. This man was a monster of monsters. So you'll probably see his funeral on TV and notice all the people who were kissing and hugging and went there to celebrate this devil, this satanic piece of crap, okay? And you might say, hey, Jake, you served Republicans, Anna just explained that. Nixon, Ford, why did you mention the Democrats? Because this is the uniparty. Because the Democrats celebrate him as much as the Republicans do. They love Henry Kissinger. It's disgusting what he did. And of course he showed no remorse, but guys, the second important fact, it was never effective. They make it seem like, well, it's a necessary evil. What we had to do to win in Vietnam. Wait a minute, did we win in Vietnam? No, we didn't win. Did we win in Cambodia? We weren't even at war in Cambodia. 2.5 million people dead, and it didn't work at all. Henry Kissinger killed people and got nothing for it. Pure monster. And they never even talk about what a failure he was. Total, complete failure. What happened, Henry? Did we win in Vietnam? Did we win anywhere? No. All those poor people in Chile, Cambodia, and all across the world because of your monstrosity. And yet no one in the mainstream media and establishment says this guy was a piece of crap who never succeeded at anything. All he did was murder people. Oh, the beloved establishment in America.
In 2001, Anthony Bourdain wrote a memoir, and he actually mentions Henry Kissinger in that memoir. And I want to read a few excerpts from it for you. He wrote, "Once you've been to Cambodia, you'll never stop wanting to beat Henry Kissinger to death with your bare hands. You will never again be able to open a newspaper and read about that treacherous, prevaricating, murderous scumbag sitting down for a nice chat with Charlie Rose or attending some black tie affair for a new glossy magazine without choking. Witness what Henry did in Cambodia, the fruits of his genius for statesmanship, and you will never understand why he's not sitting in the dock at The Hague next to Milosevic." And Bourdain was, by the way, referencing the former Yugoslavian and Serbian leader who was on trial for his own war crimes. He ended up dying in prison in 2006. And then in 2018, he actually retweeted that passage and said this: "Frequently, I've come to regret things I've said. This, from 2001, is not one of those times."
Yes.
What a hero.
Yeah, and we appreciate Bourdain for that and for being a rare truth
teller
speaker. Yes.
Yeah.
And guys, one other thing that's so important here. Henry Kissinger was good at one thing and one thing only, which was using and manipulating American media. So he would get the media to do propaganda on his behalf, cover up all of his war crimes and then put positive pieces in the story. Now you wonder why I get frustrated at mainstream media. They've been doing that kind of crap for all this time. You read about the Dulles brothers, and how they ran, one of them ran the CIA, the other one was Secretary of State, and they were just working on behalf of American corporations, some of which that they owned, right, and worked for. And the murders that our CIA did, but the key to getting away with it was they had partners at Time and New York Times and all these publications, and they would tell them, write the exact opposite. Say that we're doing this for freedom and democracy, and they would. So unfortunately, American media has been lying to you for a long, long time.
Now let's move on to Chile. But before we do, I want to give you like a broader picture, because it's not just about what happened in Cambodia. It's not just about what happened in Chile. For instance, during his time in charge of the American foreign policy machine, Kissinger also directed illegal arms sales to Pakistan as it carried out a brutal crackdown on its Bengali population in 1971. He supported the 1973 military coup that overthrew a democratically elected socialist government in Chile, gave the go-ahead to Indonesia's 1975 invasion of East Timor, and backed Argentina's repressive military dictatorship as it launched its dirty war against dissenters and leftists in 1976. His policies during the Ford administration also fueled civil wars in Africa, most notably Angola. Even the most generous calculations suggest that the murderous regimes Kissinger supported and the conflicts they waged were responsible for millions of deaths and millions of other human rights abuses during and after the 8 years he served in the American government. In just 8 years, he caused that much pain, death, destruction. So let's talk about Chile. So US officials were especially concerned about Salvador Allende, a self-proclaimed Marxist and a member of Chile's Socialist Party who ran for president multiple times and was a leading contender in the 1964 election. He had pledged to nationalize the mostly US-owned copper companies, a large industry in Chile. And when it comes to the US orchestrating, military coups or these regime change wars within these countries, it was always in regard to US business interests and the fear that these newly elected socialist leaders would nationalize, certain sectors of their economy and go against the American business community. And that was certainly the case in Chile. So the US actually spent a ton of money in propaganda to basically support Allende's opposition in 1964. That influence at the time proved to be effective because he lost that election. However, he ran again in 1970 and he actually ended up winning despite the US engaging in the same type of propaganda operation and all the funding that they provided for that. Nixon instructed the top US officials to do whatever they could to prevent Allende from taking office. Kissinger was especially concerned about the example it would set for Western European countries to have a socialist freely elected, okay?
While we pretend to be the purveyors of democracy.
So at that point, they get the CIA involved. And so if you're wondering why there's so much distrust toward the CIA, especially among the left, this is part of the reason why. The CIA met with the Chilean army in a direct effort to foment a coup to stop an Allende presidency. A top general who opposed a coup was killed in a kidnapping plot. Now, Allende ended up taking office anyway, but that's when the US got really aggressive. The US spent $8 million, and at that time, that was a lot of money, on covert actions between 1970 and the 1973 coup, according to a 1975 Senate report. US officials also backed economic measures to squeeze Allende's government. El Mercurio, a large Santiago daily newspaper opposed to Allende, even received money from the CIA to the tune of $1.5 million. And unfortunately and tragically, on the morning of September 11th, 1973, the military launched a coup and took control of the country. Military jets bombed the presidential palace. Allende killed himself after giving a final defiant address to the country. And guess who came into power after that? Well, it was General Augusto Pinochet, the army chief once thought to be loyal to Chile's constitution, soon emerged as the country's new leader. The military junta began a ruthless campaign against communists and socialists. People were tortured, they were killed, they were held in detention centers across Chile. It was a complete and utter disaster for the Chilean people. And it was all because the United States didn't like the fact that a Marxist got elected to power democratically in that country.
Yeah, so there's a great book called The Devil's Chessboard about the CIA, not about Kissinger, and it covers Allen Dulles that I mentioned earlier. The reason I'm bringing it up here is because the CIA didn't work for us, guys. They worked for American companies. So if Dole had banana plants in a Latin American country and they nationalized the bananas, because it's literally their bananas, they would go get the CIA to either murder the guy or drive him out in a coup, and they would put in a puppet who would torture their own people, but sell bananas at a cheaper price to us. And that's why they're called banana republics. And in Chile, they had the misfortune of having copper. And did you and I get the copper? Or did they steal that copper on our behalf? No, no. American companies got the copper. They sold it at the same price to you guys. You didn't get 1 cent of a break. But they took the extra profits and put it in their pockets, and then they shared it with war criminals like Allen Dulles and Henry Kissinger. And how did they share it with Kissinger? Well, as soon as he was out of office, he got every speech, every endowment, every board position you could imagine. They funneled millions and millions and millions of dollars to Henry Kissinger for murders well done on behalf of American corporations. So now that's the ugly truth, but it's definitely the truth. But if you turn on television and you look at the establishment in America, Republican or Democrat, nothing but love for this war criminal.
So I want to go to some of the headlines that got a little bit of backlash on social media from people who want to provide cover for Kissinger. But overall, I would say the left has been celebrating these headlines because they're honest. Let's start with Rolling Stone, where Spencer Ackerman's piece is titled, "Henry Kissinger, war criminal beloved by America's ruling class, finally dies. The infamy of Nixon's foreign policy architect sits eternally beside that of history's worst mass murderers. A deeper shame attaches to the country that celebrates him." And then you have HuffPost, which has a similarly brutal headline in regard to Henry Kissinger's passing. Henry Kissinger, America's most notorious war criminal, dies at 100. A titan of American foreign policy, was complicit in millions of deaths and never showed remorse for his decisions. And I think it's important to also take a look at what the corporate media has published about him. So let's go to the next graphic 18 here, because Max Kennerly is responding to a Washington Post piece about Kissinger that's titled, "Henry Kissinger dies at 100. The diplomat exercised an unparalleled control over US international affairs and policymaking. He was also the target of relentless critics who deemed him unprincipled and amoral." Well, Kennerly is correct in seeing a lot of unkind words about Henry Kissinger, but not nearly enough. Don't be shy. History demands he be remembered for the monster he was. And I totally agree with him on that. Others celebrated Kissinger's passing, including Jacobin. I didn't know about what Jacobin had done, but I want to read this next graphic to you. Jacobin hated Henry Kissinger so much that they wrote a book-length obituary years ago and commissioned 50,000 copies and just let them sit until he died. He finally died. Unbeatable levels of hater. I am inspired.
Yeah,
that is pretty amazing.
But look, so that's the tiny silver lining in this story. You see the new independent media putting pressure on corporate media.
Yes.
And hey, let's be honest about this guy. And so when now all of a sudden the Washington Post has to put the caveat of like, critics say he might have been amoral, and notice they frame it as relentless critics. Like,
I know.
Yeah, it makes them seem like they're bothering the poor guy.
They're hysterical, okay? Yeah. They're acting crazy. Okay, but you want to see another headline that the Washington Post published today? Get a load of this. "The surprising dating life of Henry Kissinger, a West Wing playboy." You proud of that? You proud of that piece, Timothy Bella? Like, amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah, oh well, I didn't know that he got laid so much.
Wow.
Silver lining. Okay, well now I see why you celebrate him so much. Okay, but the reason they do, guys, is because then they'd have to, if they say he's a war criminal, then they'd have to admit, oh yeah, there's tons of people who break the law among the powerful in American government, and they never get held accountable. And that is something they never, ever, ever want to admit. If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.